Arizona 360 takes a look back.
She had heard that the U.S. was giving mothers and children asylum until the end of May.
Issues that define 2018.
This is a fight because we love our students.
And how they evolved over time.
It does look like a Democratic wave is forming, but there's a lot of time between now and November.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thank you for joining us. Over the last year, Arizona often landed in the national spotlight as certain events developed around issues like teacher pay, immigration, and politics. This week, we revisit our own reporting on some of these topics to explore how they affected Arizonans. We begin with education funding.
Our K-12 education system is certainly not perfect, but we are seeing signs of progress, and we're going to see more.
In our series premiere, Governor Doug Ducey indicated education funding would be a priority of his going into 2018, an issue underscored in his State of the State address.
80% of our new budget priorities, you'll see Friday, will be for public education.
The dollars couldn't come sooner. That's a sense we got from public school administrators who discussed ongoing difficulties with hiring.
Teacher pay is the biggest obstacle to getting the most appropriate person into the classroom. Even those that we're getting into the profession, we're not keeping them very long.
By spring, a movement emerged, Red for Ed. There are calls for pay raises, emboldened by teacher strikes in West Virginia and elsewhere.
If Governor Ducey really wants to be the governor that's pro-public education, and this legislature wants to avoid situations that we've been seeing throughout the country, then they have to move forward with legislation and funding, and they need to do so now.
We don't go into teaching for the money. Absolutely, we don't. However, we should still be able to live. We should still be able to have a livable wage.
As their message spread, elected officials began to weigh in.
If you're worrying about, gee, I have to have a second job to make ends meet because my profession doesn't pay me enough, well, that takes energy away from what they can do in the classroom each and every day also.
Legislators did pass a 20-year extension of Prop 301, a sales tax that provides a $500 million funding stream for public schools each year. The move received praise along with criticism for only maintaining the status quo.
This bill does avert a crisis. It eliminates the cliff.
Teachers wanted more, a 20% raise. They continued to demonstrate before and after school. As the likelihood of a walkout loomed, the governor's office unveiled its 20 by 2020 plan, promising to boost pay 20% by the year 2020. It translated to more than $580 million over the next 3 years.
Those are going to be protected dollars. We're not going to be looking to cut those in future years.
The plan did not prevent teacher unions and the grassroots group Arizona Educators United from voting to walk out until lawmakers met their demands.
Can you even believe this is happening right now in Arizona? Can you honestly even believe that this is taking place?
Right now, the governor's plan only proposes increases for teachers. We know that there's a number of other educators in the system that deserve salary increases.
This is a fight because we love our students, and I know that even on my personal Facebook page, the parents that are on my page are fully supportive of this.
The walkout kept tens of thousands of students out of class. As it progressed, our coverage included showcasing how the community stepped up to help.
We have about 575 kids right now who are registered for the day camp.
Historic demonstrations at the Capitol.
I have been so inspired by your movement, by the Red for Ed, because it's not falling upon deaf ears.
School districts that never closed their doors.
They're happy that their teachers are here. Some of them were concerned with the initial, oh, you're going to leave us.
And educators who kept teaching even when they weren't certain they would be paid.
I am not being paid for any of this time. I've received $0 for everything that I've done in the last 4 days.
A week after walking out, teachers agreed to come back, accepting a budget that reinforced the governor's 20 by 2020 plan. It offered them a 9% raise next school year, with a promise of 5% raises over the following 2 years. Governor Ducey sought to reassure educators they could count on those dollars.
I've already committed that I'm going to veto any budget that's anything less than this, and I would think anyone that would be in this office, because those dollars are there and they're committed to the teachers, would be moving these to the teachers. These are fair questions. They're questions that teachers have asked me.
Nobody was truly happy with this plan. The teachers wanted more. The governor offered less and really had to be dragged to the table to provide what he did. And both sides can walk away from this and say, we didn't get everything we wanted, but it was a win. And, nobody's lying in that sense.
Into the new school year, we checked back in with administrators about persisting challenges with funding, like enrollment drops.
So you have the enrollment piece. You also have our continued and well-publicized and documented challenges with facilities and with capital funding.
And we asked educators about the lasting impact of Red for Ed.
I hope that there's been an awareness level that has increased among parents and among the general community. I hope that people are realizing that there's a real need to fund our schools, and that hopefully they will keep that in mind in November when they're voting for candidates who are willing to do that.
In November, voters signaled they wanted change, electing a teacher to the state's highest education post. Political newcomer Kathy Hoffman goes into the new year understanding enacting change will take time.
We have schools that are on the brink of shutting down because of lack of funding, frankly. And so for me, it will be a challenge to be patient, to work through the process, work through the bureaucracy.
Superintendent-elect Kathy Hoffman will be inaugurated on January 7th. The next legislative session begins January 14th. The national dialogue and events surrounding immigration made it one of the most turbulent issues of 2018. More often than not, many closely watched topics had ties here in Arizona.
In January, the debate over immigration reform focused on DACA, or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. President Trump announced plans to end the program in March, demanding lawmakers pass a permanent solution.
But any solution has to include the wall.
We heard from families concerned about what DACA's end could mean for them. In both cases, at least one parent has DACA status and American-born children.
If they deport my parents and they take me with them, I'm not going to fit in.
I decided I have to sacrifice my career because I have to fight to stay in this beautiful country with my family.
With the future of DACA in jeopardy, we learned about the legal limbo recipients faced.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security is honoring extensions or applications for people who have had DACA in the past, but they're not even adjudicating new DACA applications. And in terms of the time limits, who knows how long this is going to last?
Despite inaction from Congress, a federal judge would intervene and preserve DACA amid ongoing legal arguments.
And what we saw with the passage of the latest omnibus spending bill is that one of the key provisions that the Trump administration was asking for, which is more money for border security, they approved money for that. But what they were asking for in exchange, the protections for Dreamers, was completely left out.
By spring, headlines about a migrant caravan from Central America garnered widespread attention. One researcher described its origins as an annual migration with religious ties.
This is not a storming of the border. And again, only a small percentage of the group will actually come all the way north. Many people never intended to come all the way to the United States.
At the same time, concerned tweets from President Trump preceded a decision to authorize governors in border states to deploy the National Guard. They would support agents performing tasks unrelated to law enforcement. In May, ports of entry saw an influx of asylum seekers, many arriving with families, sometimes waiting days to speak with federal authorities.
People had heard different things. One mother told me that she had heard that the U.S. was giving mothers and children asylum until the end of May.
Among those requesting asylum, we met a woman from Honduras who feared for her life in her home country because she is transgender. An immigration attorney explained what makes an asylum claim valid.
You can only seek asylum if your fear of returning to your country is because of 5 specific reasons. And that's because you fear persecution based on your race, your national origin, your political opinion, your religion, or your membership in this mushy category called a particular social group.
Come June, and much of the discussions concerned family separations, a consequence of the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy.
It appears our critics want a 2-tier legal system.
They think illegal aliens should get different, perhaps better treatment than U.S. citizens because they happen to be illegal aliens. No jail if they have a family, no critical consequences if they have children. I'm here today to tell you differently.
The pushback was immediate.
The fact remains that we dehumanize these people and their kids if we make this all about enforcement only.
Separation stopped that same month, and a federal judge ordered the government to reunite affected families. Heightened attention on the issue brought the First Lady to Arizona, where she saw firsthand how families were processed. And it led to greater scrutiny of Southwest Key, a national nonprofit that shelters immigrant children in Tucson and the Phoenix area. Our efforts to learn about its operations included a discussion with a former employee.
When you're a kid under 12 and it's bedtime, even a regular kid is gonna misbehave and be difficult. Now you imagine this kid doesn't know where their parents are, they don't know where they are per se, they don't know anything, and so they're expressing this trauma, particularly at night when it's time to go to bed.
During the summer, we also got a bird's eye view of the border patrolled by federal agents in Pima and Yuma counties, the challenges both terrains present, and the role of air support.
Whether or not you get anything or not, it's like you don't get paid for finding people. You don't get paid for apprehensions or seizures. It's coming in and being the support that you need to do for the agents on the ground.
As fall approached, agents encountered more large groups of asylum seekers in the West Desert. Others willing to wait would continue to ask for asylum at the ports.
These people don't even have a clue sometimes what political asylum is, but we have to pray very, very hard because when you hear them talk, they don't qualify, a lot of them.
Requests for asylum continued to soar. In late October, news of another approaching caravan from Central America led President Trump to order active duty troops to the border. That included more than 1,500 service members in Arizona. An attorney and expert on national security shed light on the potential scope of their roles.
They cannot engage in law enforcement functions, and there's a 1878 act that prohibits that. Basically, our U.S. military troops from engaging in domestic law enforcement in the U.S., and by law enforcement functions we mean things like apprehension, arrest, search and seizure, interrogation, and detention.
As we saw in November, their duties included installing razor wire along portions of the border wall in communities like Nogales. We heard from the heads of Border Patrol in Tucson and Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Phoenix about challenges with processing the influx of families seeking asylum.
Large groups of family units and children who have been showing up in the West Desert area out there being dropped off overwhelm our resources that we have in a lot of these areas.
The message is if you're arriving with a child, it's very unlikely that you will be detained by ICE. It's very likely that you'll be released.
And we visited faith-based nonprofits in Arizona and Sonora, helping immigrants with food, shelter, and medical attention.
It's difficult when people are waiting in Mexico. They have a sense of urgency. They just need to get into a more safe and stable place.
There in Guatemala,
it is very sad. We don't have anything. We don't have enough to eat, and we don't have land. We don't have a house. We have nothing.
These are the most innocent, loving people, and all they want is a chance. They just want a chance in America. They love this country.
By the end of November, the caravan's arrival led to a confrontation outside California. Federal agents closed the port and launched tear gas into Tijuana when a group of migrants tried to rush the border.
And what CBP told us is they mentioned that this wasn't just a possibility in San Diego anymore, but that they were taking precautions all along the California border and even in San Luis, Arizona.
Amid ongoing steps to harden the border, the issue of immigration reform remains unresolved on Capitol Hill. While stories about immigration routinely intersected with Arizona's border, it wasn't the only issue impacting the region. Arizona's economic ties with Mexico and its many border communities also came into focus throughout the year. Ongoing talks to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, picked up in January. We explored what was on the line for Arizona and its trade relationship with Mexico.
When it comes to the NAFTA negotiations, really is a federal purview. It is federal government to federal government. Nevertheless, I believe the leadership of people like Governor Ducey and his entire team in putting Arizona in the best position possible.
We haven't taken our foot off the pedal. We continue to go fast at this and go strong because our economy very much depends on that. With you're talking about almost $19 billion in trade between what we do with Canada and what we do with Mexico.
We also saw firsthand at the Mariposa port of entry in Nogales how customs officials enforce NAFTA.
This is the document that we use to verify the legitimacy of NAFTA claims, whether they're good qualifiers or not. This is the document that the trade has to use. Those customs consultants, the importing community, the exporters, everybody that touches NAFTA has to understand the contents of this book.
One of NAFTA's original negotiators, former Arizona Representative Jim Colby, discussed the deal's lasting impact and where there was room for improvement.
If you take agriculture, Mexico has become a huge export market for the United States, a huge market. 40% of all of our grain goes to Mexico. If we were to walk away from NAFTA, it would be devastating to our agriculture industry and to Midwestern states.
24 years ago, I mean, should it be renegotiated now? Are there things that could be changed?
Yeah, absolutely. NAFTA does need to be modernized. There were things that didn't exist in those days, digital economy, for example.
Trade fueled Arizona's other endeavors in Mexico. We profiled a program run by the Arizona Department of Transportation designed to speed up commercial traffic at the ports. It included training truckers in Mexico about safety and compliance.
Our bottom line here is to be safe. We want the roads to be safe as those trucks go into Arizona. We also don't want to hold up the trucks any more than we have to.
For the government of Arizona to send their people to teach us, this is a great gesture on how we can live better together between two countries.
We also got a better sense of how issues around border security and international trade intersect with lives of those who call the borderlands home. We heard from ranchers, community leaders, and business owners.
I don't think that we get a very fair representation from the media to Santa Cruz County. I work for the Nogales Chamber of Commerce, and I also represent the Tourism Center. And I can tell you that I feel very safe.
When you talk about Nogales, you should be talking about international trade. You should be talking about billions of dollars worth of commerce. And that is very hard for us to get recognition from the federal government that that's happening in our community. If you just look at our customs staffing, we're at a 30% deficiency in our port of entry.
At the start of summer, with NAFTA's future still in question, we heard from business advocates and companies closely watching negotiations.
Union Pacific Railroad is the only freight railroad with 6 gateways in and out of Mexico, one of those being here in Arizona at Nogales. You can't help but think about NAFTA and that discussion today. It's something we're paying particular attention to, not just Union Pacific, but I think business at large is paying attention to that.
We now have supply chains that are totally integrated across international borders.
Meanwhile, the governors of Arizona and Sonora fortified the two states' relationship at a summit in Tucson for the Arizona-Mexico Commission.
Well, there's going to be a relationship between Arizona and Sonora regardless of what happens. I'm advocating for a new and improved NAFTA. I'd like to see a NAFTA 2.0.
The truth is, the two of us have been working on this relationship for more than 3 years. But the relations between Sonora and Arizona has more years than the same free trade agreement.
In July, Mexicans elected a new president. Focus then shifted to how promises made during his campaign would impact the border.
Among them is significantly cutting some of the taxes in the border area and also significantly reducing some of the customs, I guess not enforcement, but certainly making it easier for goods to go back and forth, again with the idea being to really promote economic development in that part of the country.
And by late August, President Trump announced the U.S., Mexico, and Canada had reached a deal. We got insight on what the terms of the new pact stipulated.
I think the most significant impacts for Arizona are what was not changed. And that is, as far as I can tell from what we've seen, there are no changes that would disrupt the enormous flow of Mexican fruits and vegetables across the Nogales border.
In late November, the leaders of all three countries signed the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. Just days before the inauguration of Mexico's president-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador, whose administration could usher in more economic change in the coming years.
There's definitely, if not a concern, a huge interest to keep a good relationship with Mexico and also to keep growing the commercial ties with it.
The U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement still needs approval from federal lawmakers in all three countries in order to take effect. President Trump has said he will withdraw the U.S. from NAFTA, putting the pressure on Congress to accept the new deal. All the issues we've covered so far also factored into the midterm elections. Pundits and politicos speculated throughout the year whether Democrats could flip seats in a state that President Trump won in 2016. Congressional races began to take shape early in the year, with some candidates declaring their runs in January.
I am a candidate for the office of United States Senate from Arizona.
This has not been a state that's been kind to Democrats in recent years. You look at the polling right now, it does look like a Democratic wave is forming, but there's a lot of time between now and November, and a lot could happen.
Fast forward to the summer. As we neared the primary, we heard from the candidates running for governor.
I'm running because the truth matters, and we're not being told the truth in some very critical areas.
The people who are running our state government are not putting the people of Arizona first.
They will never have a governor more committed to public education, public schools than me.
I have always supported any effort that would bring more money to our public schools.
Well, what's important to me is quality education that's accessible for all of our kids.
And the Republican and Democratic parties began to lay out their strategies for the general election.
So we're able to hone in on the messaging that Arizonans care about and the issues that they care about, so that we can go then and talk to them and deliver the correct message to their door and let them know that the Republican values are still the values that Arizonans hold dear here.
If Democrats don't quite see that shift this election cycle, will there be a look in the mirror and ask, what do we need to do moving forward?
Well, we've been doing that for several cycles, and we have been reaching to every corner of the state. The party is very diverse, and we want all folks in our party and all Arizonans to get ahead. And what we're seeing is that the messaging we're doing today about Arizona values and working families and everyday Arizonans is really resonating.
Some of the discussion focused on how the candidates could win over moderates after the primary.
They have to show the party base that they are a committed, either conservative or progressive, and then they also have to leave wiggle room to then show the broader audience of moderates in each party and of independents that they are best situated to represent them.
Then you look at the all-important moderates, the swing voters, they actually are, education is their number one, so they look just like liberals. And then also with Trump, with favorability, they have a very unfavorable opinion of the president.
In August, partisan politics briefly came to a halt as Arizona and the country mourned the passing of Senator John McCain. Governor Ducey would go on to appoint John Kyle to McCain's open seat, calling the longtime lawmaker back to Congress.
Arizona needs someone who can hit the ground running on day one, and that's John Kyle.
Kyle agreed, adding that he would only serve through the end of the year.
I left the Senate in 2013 after having served in it for 18 years, in addition to 8 years in the House. And there comes a point when you say, I've done enough.
Is there a blue wave out here tonight?
After the primary, speculation intensified whether a blue wave would sweep the polls and push back against the Trump administration.
Now, I'm sorry, I have too many people walking into my headquarters every day and calling us on the phone and saying, I haven't been active for a long time. I need to get active. I need to help. And they're being motivated by what's happening at the federal level.
And we have Democrats walking into our office every day changing their registration because they say their party has gone too far left.
Through a series of debates hosted by Arizona Public Media, voters heard from candidates running for governor.
Doug Ducey's quick reversal with Red for Ed is an example of him being a follower, not a leader.
We are not asking to abolish ICE like Mr. Garcia is.
Candidates for Congressional District 2.
I think that if Ann is elected to this seat, we will see tax reform roll back.
She has said she would privatize Social Security.
And candidates for Congressional District 3.
I believe that education at the bottom line is the short-term, long-term solution to economic development.
We need to provide resources in both the urban and rural areas that are going to be beneficial for our youth.
But the race that captivated most was the neck-and-neck run between Representatives Martha McSally and Kirsten Sinema for U.S. Senate.
I voted to protect people with pre-existing conditions.
Healthcare is the #1 issue that people talk to me about. And while they're concerned about the increasing costs of healthcare, they're even more concerned about what's at stake and what they could lose.
While we heard from candidates, we also heard from voters.
In this district, the people in the middle decide
about the issues compelling their choices.
For small business, I think we need somebody in Washington that has a voice.
Comprehensive immigration reform is part and parcel of a border security package.
Motivating young adults to go to the polls.
I think students are, especially nowadays, are really not wanting to be put into boxes, and so they're really wanting to be active and learn more about these policies and stand up against specific issues instead of actually like a party.
Challenges with getting Latinos to cast ballots.
We're talking about a very young population who already is sort of prone to non-voter habits. And so, coupling it with the youth vote makes it even more sort of a non-voting population.
And why, regardless of demographics, voting is a right worth exercising.
So many people in our world don't have the opportunity to vote.
It is a privilege and a responsibility.
In the home stretch to Election Day, Arizona did look more like a battleground state, with visits from the president and other high-profile politicians.
Donald J. Trump!
Anytime there are high-profile politicians that come to a state, what it does for the candidates is that they're supporting is increase their exposure.
Senator Bernie Sanders.
That is important because it gets them local exposure in a variety of outlets. That's one of the reasons why people particularly appreciate presidential visits, but any high-profile politician that comes in, it helps.
And following Election Day, it would take several more days to determine key races and the direction voters want Arizona to take.
I don't think that we're going to know, maybe even after the 2020 election, whether there's a true blue wave in Arizona. The Democrats did very well this time. I wonder if it is a reaction to President Trump. I wonder if the same people who voted for him but wouldn't tell us in 2016, this time around did not vote for Republicans because of him and also won't tell us.
As the year winded down, Arizonans learned they would be represented by not one, but two women in the U.S. Senate. Democratic Senator-elect Sinema and Republican Representative McSally, whom Governor Ducey appointed to succeed John Kyle in January. In 2020, voters will decide if she should keep the seat and finish out the late Senator McCain's term.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. As we get ready for the new year, we want to hear from you about some of the issues you think deserve our attention. Let us know what you think. Find us on social media or send us an email at arizona360@azpm.org. We're back next week. Until then, happy holidays.